This is the Chapter 46 Animal Reproduction lecture. Let's talk about reproduction. Okay, Animal Kingdom. Practically every member of the animal kingdom does sexual reproduction. If they don't, that means they lost it. Not that they never had it, but their ancestors, the ancestral animal line, is a sexually reproducing line. So it's kind of like the legs on a snake. A snake used to have legs and got rid of them. Sexual reproduction is simply combining two genomes, which is usually done with sperm and egg. And that first cell is called a zygote, of course. And everyone listening to this lecture was at one point a zygote. Now, asexual is just cloning. Sometimes it's called budding, depending on how complex the body is. If the whole body can break in half, like that's true with a sponge or with a sea anemone, they have very simple bodies, so they can turn into two complete organisms. But for other things, sometimes it's actually creating its own sperm and egg. So I say asexual reproduction is the creation of offspring without egg and sperm. Technically not true, because there's plenty of animals that are self-fertile. So that doesn't count as sex because they're not combining two different genomes. Okay, so fission, or sometimes called budding, is where an organism can split in half. This is not terribly common in animals you care to think about, but does show up in your cnidarians, and is, of course, a way that you can accidentally reproduce if you're a sponge. Very few sponges try to break off a portion of themselves. But if a portion gets broken off, if it lodges in a reasonable climate, you get another sponge that grows out of it. Okay, so you get here this budding thing is where you get your fragmentation from. Normally the fission is where you actually separate the body. So I misspoke a little bit before. See, I told you I was no good at reproduction. I always get my terms backwards. So once again, fission is where you split into two individuals. Budding is where you break off a piece or send off a smaller version of yourself. Okay, I guess technically the creation of a whole bunch of Medusa, the little babies, baby jellyfish in Obelia. Okay, to me that seems like budding. Okay, because you're not you're just taking mitosis and you're taking the normal diploid cells of that Obelia polyp and creating a separate organism that can float away that's genetically identical to you. Parthenogenesis is a weird thing. This is the thing that is normally done by animals that have lost the ability to do sex. Okay, this is where you take an egg, unfertilized, and create a new organism out of it. There are several species of lizard that can do this. You can tell that they used to have sex because they still make a fake copulating motion, and they still assume the positions that a sexually reproducing lizard would. It's just that this uniparensis, isn't that cute? Uniparensis, single parent. So this species is just mimicking what they used to have, and for some reason it was beneficial in a population to lose the concept of male. At some point that was beneficial, it was helpful. They got rid of it for that species. However, I will go ahead and commit to say that as a long-term solution, this species is going to go extinct, because we do not see many higher organisms that have lost the ability to reproduce sexually that then are able to adapt to a changing environment. Okay, so these guys are cloning themselves forevermore, and the only time that they will get any new genetic characteristics is if that particular cloned line is mutated. Okay, but you cannot move characteristics from one of these lizards into the characteristics of another of these lizards. So if two different lizards create two different unique traits, you cannot get both of those unique traits into the same individual. You need sex for that. And whereas bacteria can still pull it off because they had those weird ways of taking up DNA from their environment, you're not going to see that in a lizard. So this is kind of a downward slope, in my opinion. Okay. Now, I've kind of teased at the answer to this, but the idea of sexual reproduction has a problem in that not only do you need to run into another member of your species in order to have kids, not only does that member of the species have to be of the opposite sex, but of the things you create, of the babies you put out, half of them are not are also reproductively unable to create a child. In this case, we're going to think of the female as the only thing that can create the child, so the male is, somewhat wasted. So if you want to spread your species quickly and you want to make the maximum number of children, having separate male and female is dumb. Now, I said if. If it's about speed of reproduction, okay, this slows you down, but speed of reproduction ain't everything. I mean, insects can reproduce really fast. Notice they haven't taken over the whole earth. So beyond this concept, and by the way, insects still have male and female. They're just really fast reproducers. I'm just using them as an example. Bacteria are asexual. They haven't taken over the whole earth. Okay, they're not like, choking us all out. So the idea is that a eukaryotic species must have some advantage conferred by the sex, and the advantage is adaptability. The idea that you can have many, many, many more combinations of traits if you can take traits in one individual and traits in another individual and randomly put them together and see what you get. You can create very many more successes that way. Otherwise, if I have one gene that contributes towards intelligence and another person had a different gene, a completely different locus, that could also contribute towards intelligence, there'd be no way, if we were asexual, there'd be no way for my intelligent gene to end up in the same person as that other intelligent gene, because I would just be cloning myself, and that one half of really cool intelligence, the other half of really cool intelligence would be forever separated from me and my descendants. Okay, so there you go, increased adaptation. Now, menstrual cycle versus estrus cycle is a little weird. It's not about the bleeding, okay? Though you do get a little bit of bleeding in estrus cycle. Estrus cycle tends to have less. The key is this: it's about monthly or periodic. That's why it's called a period. Okay, it's a cycle of a certain number of days. That's your menstrual cycle. The estrus cycle is a certain time of year. Often, though this gets disrupted in some domesticated animals like dogs. When you consider a horse, horses are really just don't need to be born in the middle of the winter because they come out wet, they would shiver to death, and they would also have problems finding food. Okay, and mom would have a problem nursing that child. So instead, yes, horses are mammals, they still nurse. Most people don't think about that fact. They think only cows nurse. All right, but anyway, that wet horse would die and wouldn't have any food. So what you do is you time it to where the heat cycle for the female horse occurs enough months in advance such that the child is born in the spring. Okay, and that's why they call it dancing around like a spring foal. A foal is a baby horse, and they tend to be born in the spring when it's warm enough and there's plenty of food. That's estrus. Okay, so where do you find menstrual animals? Well, the ape family is key, where, kind of makes sense because apes evolved in a jungle where there is no cycle of seasons. Also, the menstrual cycle animals tend to have sex a lot more commonly because in the estrus cycle, a female is not receptive to sex when she's out of season, as in she'll bite your face off. And sometimes the genitalia do not line up; they physically misalign, so that you cannot have sex outside of the season. Menstrual cycle: the apes invented the idea of sex as a bonding routine. Okay, that it continually bonds you. You have sex multiple times to bond partners together. Okay, it bonds social structures, creates more of a family unit for the care of children. And also, dolphins do this. Dolphins are a bit weird. They use sex as play. They don't recognize the difference between playing with a ball and having sex, which is sometimes very interesting for dolphin trainers. There's a little bit of briefing and training you have to give some people before they work with dolphins. They're like, look, he may make a pass at you, because they also don't recognize humans as separate from dolphins. So, I mean, nobody's ever been like aggressively attacked, but dolphins do sometimes come up and go, hey, you wanna? Because they use it as a pair bonding scenario, as a way to keep the group socially interactive. Okay, so maybe you never not wanted to know that about the menstrual cycle, and that's what its real goal was. Really, it's focusing on sexual activity being constant versus seasonal, and that also lines up with whether or not children are born seasonally versus born kind of at random. Oh, isn't it cute? A little elk, or no, it's not an elk. Is that a caribou? I feel like I should know what that is, but every time I look at it, I just think, oh, so cute. And that's all I get to. Okay. Weird thing about sexuality, you can have hermaphrodism. Okay. Hermaphrodism means having both male and female gametes, producing them both. There is no such thing as a human hermaphrodite, no matter what you hear on the internet or read on the internet or see, God forbid. There's some scary things on the internet. But hermaphrodism requires the production of sperm and eggs. Pseudo-hermaphrodites, which do occur even without surgery, okay, without any funky surgery, some humans can be born pseudo-hermaphrodite. That means they have the appearance of being female, but then turn into a male later. Okay, that is one way that it happens. That person is usually sterile and produces neither sperm nor eggs. Okay, so that doesn't count as a hermaphrodite. Now, some hermaphrodites are self-fertile, like the roundworm, the C. elegans that we love to do a whole bunch of genetic experiments on. Is self-fertile, and that's one of the reasons why we love to use it for genetic experiments. Now, that doesn't mean they never have sex, because they also will cross-copulate. But another example of a hermaphrodite is the earthworm, and those are not self-fertile. The two hermaphrodites have to find each other in order to mate, and they both mate, and they both get pregnant at the same time. Okay. So let's talk about fertilization. You have external and internal fertilization. Mammals practice internal fertilization. In fact, yeah, we'll go with mammals, and most tetrapods do this. Okay, and so this is what copulation is. Okay, copulation, what we think of as having sex, quotes, as the verb form, that's copulation, and that's an internal fertilization thing. Okay, okay, here's a different example. Now we're talking about external fertilization. Okay, in this picture, this is two frogs having sex. Notice they're not copulating. What the frog is doing is something called amplexus. He's not squeezing the eggs out of the female, but it sure does look like he's giving her the Heimlich maneuver. She's dumping the eggs because he is mimicking some kind of act that, he's reaching around her. He's doing an act that says, hey, I'm ready to fertilize your eggs. So she dumps the eggs out, and then he's going to release the sperm externally on top of the eggs. A lot of fish do this as well. Okay, so things that... Sorry, I had a phone call there. But so that's the difference between internal and external fertilization. Interesting side note, cloaca. Okay, non-mammalian vertebrates tend not to have a place where, so for example, in mammalian vertebrates you have a urethra coming out of, let's go with female. So you have the urethra where urine comes out, you have a vagina where reproduction occurs, and you have an anus where defecation occurs. In a lot of these non-mammalian vertebrates, all three occur through the same opening. Ew. Aren't you glad we don't do it that way? This is also because external fertilization makes it a lot more viable to do that, because, well, I'll leave that to your recognition, but if it's just an outflow, not an inflow of anything, it's easier to just keep it all together. Okay. All right, now we're going to do reproductive organs, and this is going to be totally human biased. Okay, so we're going to go into that. Now, external, internal. Okay, external reproductive structures, what people look at and consider the external vagina, that's the labia. Okay, internal vagina is a short tube. Okay, it's longer than the penis usually, but it leads up to the uterus. The uterus is a closed structure that then at times will receive sperm cells from the vagina. That's the way that it works. Okay, so the vagina is the tube and the external labia. Okay, there you go. Internally, you've got the ovaries, which, by the way, are very similar to the testes because the male testis starts in approximately the same position and then pushes its way outward from the body during early development. Um, and of course, there were tubes going from the ovaries into the uterus. There are also tubes going from the testes. To various locations. So you're working together in that scenario. You're doing the same kind of stuff. Okay, well, I really should have done this with a picture. Okay, so there's the tube, and then here's the uterus. And if you've ever heard of cervix or cervical cancer, that's the mouth of the uterus. Okay, and cervical cancer is in some ways it's been a hot topic lately because I say lately, a couple of years ago. Because cervical cancer can be brought about by a viral infection right here on the cervix, and the virus is sexually transmitted, which is why it attacks the cervix, because that's the spot that's hit by the virus primarily. It just so happens to be, though, that human papillomavirus, the thing that you're used to, that causes cervical cancer, though it also, plenty of people get it that don't get cervical cancer, that human papillomavirus is in like 40% of the population minimum. Okay, and so that's why we came up with the papilloma vaccine, is because it's pretty common to get the papillomavirus. That's why women annually undergo a Pap smear. It's they take a Q-tip, touch get a whole bunch of these cells right here off of the cervix to see if any of them are showing weird growth that would lead towards cancer. Okay, other thoughts? Ovary. Okay, the ovary dumps eggs into the oviduct. They actually fall into an open hole there. I don't know how they never miss, but they don't ever miss. And then the oviduct leads to the uterus. Okay, baby is going to live right about here-ish. Okay, that's where placenta is going to form, usually towards the top. If placenta tries to form down here, too late. Baby comes all the way out. Nobody ever knew you were pregnant. All right. How does it work? Each month, okay, the ovary's got millions of follicles in it. The ovary had millions of follicles in it when the woman was born. Okay, all of the follicles, which means all of the eggs, were started in while she was still a fetus. With a little caveat that we have some evidence that says some follicles are produced throughout your life. So there's a backup supply being made, but by far the majority you're born with if you're female. Each follicle has a partially developed egg, and during the monthly cycle, some of these follicles, notice I said some, not just one, several, start to mature and grow. Okay. Can I? No. Okay, I'll show you the hormone cycle here in a minute. But so once a month, or every 28 days, several of them start to grow. Whichever one gets to the finish line first effectively ruptures, spitting the egg into the body of the ovary, and it follows its way out the tip of the ovary and into the oviduct. Okay. Now, if you happen to pop two follicles at the same time and send two eggs down one or both oviducts, then what happens is you've got two eggs in the system. They can both be fertilized, and that's how you get fraternal twins. Okay. The way animals that make a litter have 5 or 6 children is they pop out 5 or 6 eggs at the same time. Now, the part of the follicle that ruptured and stayed behind is the corpus luteum, is what it's called, because luteinizing is popping open that follicle. Okay, luteinizing hormone is the thing that triggered that pop. Hey, guess what triggered the growth of the follicle from last chapter? Anybody? Anybody? Follicle stimulating hormone? Yeah, it's not all that hard. Some of these hormones actually just have their name built in. Well, that corpus luteum is the thing that will secrete estrogen and progesterone, okay, at levels that will help lead to pregnancy. However, that corpus luteum is going to be reabsorbed. Okay, it's going to degenerate. So by a certain time, that egg has to be fertilized and then has to hit this wall of the uterus and attach to it and make a placenta. The starting placenta then will start making progesterone on its own a little bit and keeping that corpus luteum alive a little bit longer. If that doesn't happen, the corpus luteum is going to be gone, no more progesterone is going to be made, the uterine lining then sloughs off, and that's when you get the bleed at the end of menstruation. Okay, they go, well, I guess this was a waste of time because no egg has implanted. Okay, I'm done making progesterone for you. And then that's the end of the potential of pregnancy for that month. Side note, the corpus luteum, that is also the thing that forms into a cyst in ovarian cysts. If the corpus luteum fills with fluid and refuses to go away, that gives you polycystic ovarian syndrome, and they hurt, and they feel like, they create cramping sensations, not just like menstrual cramps, but common cramps at other times. I've already talked about all this. Let's move on to male organs. Okay, the parts that are most interesting to us. Okay, that's the wrong phrase. The parts that you're not familiar with. Okay, are the epididymis, the vas deferens. Okay, the bulbourethral gland, and the prostate gland. Okay. Penis and scrotum and everything like that, I'm confident you know what those are and what they do. But the prostate gland you may never have known. By the way, notice that the prostate gland wraps the urethra, okay, after the point where the bladder and testes kind of co-join, or the bladder and the vas deferens co-join. Okay, meaning that part of the reason that prostate enlargement and prostate cancer, one of its symptoms is you can't pee as easily because if it swells up, it's choking off the urethra. Okay, so, and then if you have to have your prostate removed, that's monkeying around with the area that leads to erectile function, so it can give you erectile dysfunction. Okay, so, testes. Okay, let's go into the anatomy of them. You have the seminiferous tubules. That's not these guys over here, not these tubules. Here is the seminiferous tubules. Okay, Leydig cells are scattered in between the tubules. These are the guys that make the testosterone and also other hormones that are necessary for sperm maturation. Okay, problem, this cannot occur at normal body temperature for most mammals. Differing on the different types of mammals have more or less let's say compatible body temperatures with sperm formation. For example, there are some animals you can barely tell that they have testes because they're so closely packed to the body. Pigs, for example, keep them fairly close. But the ape family has to get it pretty far from the body because our internal temperature is a little bit higher. Okay, so that's, that can tell you things like that. It says most mammals, notice dolphins, who are mammals, keep the testes inside the body. So they do have a body temperature that works with it. Now, all right, sperm go from the seminiferous tubules into the epididymis. The epididymis is the muscularized portion of the testes. This is the spot where you get the squeezing function that gives you ejaculation. Most people think it's the testes themselves, the largest portion. Okay, it's not. It's actually a smaller portion on top, okay, or on the side right here. Okay, that is what gives you the ejaculation force, and that's the storage location for the ejaculate. Now, sperm alone are not what's just propelled. Okay, you also have some fluids that are going to have to come through, and you got to add those to the process. Okay, so we've got to send that through the vas deferens. This is the tube. Okay, so we've got to send the sperm plus other liquids through this vas deferens and down out into the urethra. So, what are those other liquids that we need? Okay, well, we have seminal vesicles that are going to give you some of that liquid. Okay, we have got a prostate gland that is going to give you some of that liquid, and the bulbourethral gland is going to give us some of that liquid as well. Bulbourethral gland tends to actually squeeze out some liquid before this happens because it's a neutralizer. We've got to neutralize the urine that's in the urethra before we send those very sensitive, delicate sperm cells through there. Okay, so that was all pretty fast. Let's see if we can go seminal vesicles. It's very hard to see, but there's this bulb this way and this way. Back behind here that lead, they touch right into the vas deferens. Now, gee, wouldn't it have been smart if they'd shown a cutaway of the bladder where they cut one whole half of it away so that we could see what's back there, okay, and tell what's going on? No, they didn't decide to do that. So in review, sperm start here in the seminal vesicles, mature. The Leydig cells help give them the testosterone and other things they need to mature. They go into the epididymis where they hang out. Okay, when it's time to form an ejaculate, the epididymis will push. Okay, that pushes them all the way up here through the vas deferens. Also, the seminal vesicles will push. Okay, I believe they do some pushing because otherwise the liquid wouldn't come out of them. A large portion of the liquid comes from those seminal vesicles as well. The prostate gland puts some things in there as well, considerably prostaglandins. Okay, and all of that comes out, and that forms your ejaculate. A little piece of trivia: you cannot look at an ejaculate and know whether or not there are sperm in it. Once a man has had his tubes tied, okay, down here, there's tubes cut, whatever you want to say, you can't really tell a visual difference. Most of the color and texture of semen comes from the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland, okay, and a little bit of the mucus that comes from the bulbourethral gland. Okay, not so much from the epididymis. Okay. Okay, let's make some gametes. Spermatogenesis happens a lot, okay? Though it's not as fast as it appears. Even though a man can have productive sex, let's say once a day, if the frequency goes up beyond that, you're going to have low sperm counts in the ejaculate. But once a day, once every other day, you've got a fully formed ejaculate with fully formed sperm. However, the process to form the sperm started 7 days ago, okay, to 7 weeks ago. So depending on which stage you want to consider the quote start, it's been cooking for a while. All right. So when it comes time to reproduce, some people start changing their behaviors to improve sperm production. One of those is if they were wearing jockey shorts, which pull the testes very close to the body, they start wearing boxer shorts. You got to do that for a couple months ahead of time because the process of development starts that long ago. Okay. Oogenesis is a much more prolonged process, as we noted. It doesn't create millions at a time. They created millions before they were born. They put out a few at a time. Okay. Yeah, you know that meiosis creates 4 sperm instead of 1 egg. Yeah, you know that males continue to make sperm cells all throughout the rest of their life. That those parts should not be new to you. But an interesting side note, what happens in an egg to what should be the other 3 eggs? Well, when meiosis 1 completes, when you go through telophase 1, instead of cytokinesis occurring through the center of the cell, cytokinesis occurs around the corner of the cell, wrapping one of the nuclei in a very tight plasma membrane and with almost no cytoplasm there. Okay, and that's called a polar body. Then when you go through meiosis 2 in telophase 2, that polar body didn't divide. It didn't play the game. So it's not like it divided into 2 polar bodies. It just sat there. The other nucleus, when it divided, once again, cytokinesis occurred around one corner and wrapped around only one of the nuclei very tightly. And so now you have 2 polar bodies and 1 egg. Okay, instead of the 4 sperm of meiosis. And why is this? Well, sperm, after they're done doing meiosis, continue to offload, shed weight, get smaller because they got to swim fast. The egg wants to be as big as it started because it is the sole source of food for like 7 days as the embryo is traveling down the fallopian tubes. Okay, let's get to the hormones because that's the fun part. Memorize all of this. No. Okay. You've got luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so an early rise in follicle stimulating hormone tells the body, okay, we'll just do female because male is it's daily. We have up down cycles and you can't even track them sometimes daily. But females, it's a little more interesting. I'm going to start all the way up at the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has a hormone called the gonadotropin. Okay, it's going to hit the gonads, and it's a tropic hormone. Releasing hormone. Oh, this is the releasing hormone for the gonadotropins. Okay, FSH and LH are the gonadotropins because they're tropic hormones that hit the gonads. Yeah, see, it's easy to remember now. So the FSH goes up, Okay, a little bit, just a little spike of FSH says, hey, start making an egg, start growing some follicles. Luteinizing hormone will slowly rise until you hit the moment of ovulation, where luteinizing hormone really rises, and also a small surge in follicle stimulating hormone. And that causes whichever egg is most developed to pop out. Okay, so that peak LH surge really kicks it in there. Now, what else happens? The growing follicle of the egg is what signaled the LH surge. So the estrogen started to really come up as that egg matured, and the largest egg is producing the most estrogen, triggers a surge way back up in the hypothalamus of lots of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so there was your feedback. Follicle stimulating hormone grew a follicle. The follicle produced estrogen. The peak of estrogen caused luteinizing hormone to kick in real hard, which caused the follicle to pop and reduce the amount of estrogen it's making. But now that it's a corpus luteum, now it's making progesterone, which will crank up here. Okay, and this plus the intermediate to high levels of estrogen causes an increase in the thickness of the uterine wall. Okay, so the numbers of cells on the uterus, specifically the endometrium, the layer of the uterus that is right there on the outside, starts to grow thick, starts to grow receptive, and particularly grows a lot of blood vessels all over it in preparation to form a placenta. It doesn't know where it needs to form the placenta, so it has to prepare everywhere. Then, at the end, okay, as that corpus luteum starts to break down, assuming there's no implantation of an egg stimulating production of hormones here, okay, really I should call it an embryo. If an embryo implants, it'll cause the uterus to feed back and keep these hormone levels high. If there is no embryo on the uterus, then these hormone levels drop as the corpus luteum degrades and goes away, and then you get the uterine sloughing. Notably, polycystic ovarian syndrome, the failure to degrade of the corpus luteum through weird hormone mechanisms, can inhibit this cycle, such that it can cause infertility in women. Okay, we have gone through all of this, and I really don't care. Menopause, this is when the cycle ceases. Okay, it can be a 10-year period where the cycle gets interrupted back and forth and happens some months and doesn't happen others. It is a weird thing. Human females are one of the only species that stop having children in the mother. So why? Why would this happen? Well, one example of an idea is that if a woman is still having children when her own daughters are having children, she's not really focused on her daughter's children. So what she's doing is she's actually ignoring her own descendants to a certain degree. Given that humans are highly social, and we maintain contact through generations. Humans of every culture have always paid attention to their own parents after adolescence is over, after they're adults. Dogs don't really do that. They don't hang out and try to help their parent so much. Okay, and their parent doesn't try to aid them. The parent's too busy having more kids. But in humans, you get the grandmother syndrome. A woman who can no longer have kids, so she stops focusing on her mate and starts focusing on the next generation and helping them out. And you know what? She's a little old. Maybe she's not going to go out in the field. Maybe instead she will stay behind and take care of all the children while her daughter and all the younger women in the village go out and eat. It creates a social order. This is just a hypothesis, but you got to admit it's a pretty good one. Now, male reproduction, follicle stimulating cells hit the Sertoli cells. Okay, Sertoli cells are what's in those seminiferous tubules to nourish those developing sperm and to give them the right signals to develop at the right time, because it's a 7-week process. Luteinizing hormone regulates your Leydig cells and tells them to secrete testosterone. Okay, which also helps with spermatogenesis. But if you have too much testosterone, okay, coming in, okay, that testosterone does a negative feedback on the pituitary and the hypothalamus to block luteinizing hormone. Okay, that's not a problem because really the only goal here, quote, was to hit the Leydig cells to make testosterone. Okay, so that's not a problem. We have plenty of testosterone, we block that. But if you're making too much testosterone because you are squirting it into your veins, which I alluded to last lecture, it also blocks follicle stimulating hormone, which means it also shuts down the Sertoli cells, which means you don't make sperm because you have plenty of testosterone, but you don't have the rest of the equation from the Sertoli, and the testes shrink. And that is the end of the reproduction lecture.